Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to InspireOne's first webinar for the 2018-19 series. Today's webinar is on performance management in a changing landscape. I am Varsha and I will be your moderator for today. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment to introduce you to a few things. In order to make this webinar a co-learning and sharing opportunity, we can use the text chat feature at all points during the webinar. For minimal disturbance during the course of the webinar, we would request you to keep your lines on mute. There will be a dedicated Q&A session at the last 10 minutes of the webinar. Hence, we encourage you to send us questions as you have them, and we will take those up in our Q&A session. Our webinar for today is from InspireOne. InspireOne offers leadership and organization development solutions to inspire business performance by transforming an organization's most valuable asset, their human capital. In past, InspireOne has successfully supported many businesses during their business transformation through multiple solutions, and many of these have been in the leadership space. Our speakers for today are Ms. Neeta Mohla and Mr. Craig Gould. Neeta comes with about 3 decades of experience. Her expertise is in the area of leadership assessments and development, as well as emotional intelligence. Mr. Craig Gould comes with a background involving training, operations, leadership development, sales, and consulting spanning over 18 years. He has held several leadership initiatives in companies like Deutsche Bank, PNB, JSL, and many others. We will start today's webinar by first exploring the changing landscape in performance management sphere. We will take on 3 real-life case examples for clients who have embarked on this transformational journey and conclude the webinar with some recommendations. As mentioned before, we will have a Q&A sessions at the end of the webinar, so please share your questions as you have them. In the last 2 to 3 years, we have seen a trend towards re-engineering the traditional performance management processes. For instance, even the Bersin report for the year 2016 and 17 both prominently feature this as a focus area. So, Neeta and Craig, could you share with us the on-ground reality? Is there really a trend, and is it as changed or as fast as predicted?
Right. So thank you very much, Varsha. It's a very interesting question that you ask. Because, while this prediction was made 2 years back, you're referring to 2016 report, we are seeing this permeate across the organizations at a speed that we didn't imagine. So the kind of conversations that we are hearing, and maybe I'll just talk about it from that perspective, it gives you an idea about how people are viewing this and how important it is for them, is that obviously a combination of VUCA environment and the technology-led changes are causing fears of huge disruptions in people's mind. And what people believe, especially including in the HR, is that if we don't plan and execute in a more agile way, possibly there is a lot that this disruption would cause, which then we would be difficult to manage. In the context of performance management and performance, I think that the understanding is that while technology will give us very rich data, in fact, good data, good analytics, but how this is going to be used by managers is going to become very important, especially to drive conversation and through enhanced behaviors of especially empathy and collaboration. This is an immediate ask. So the data could come from the machines, could come from technology, but it is the advanced skills of how this is going to relate to people and how managers and employees and their subordinates are going to collaborate better on this information that is going to become very important. In fact, I think there's another point which I would request Craig to build on, which is really the subject of millennials. Craig, would you like to take this up?
Yes, thank you, Neeta. So I think what we are seeing is that I think from some research, in fact, I was just reading an article on Forbes, and it indicates that we expect in excess of 75% of the workforce to be made of millennials by 2025 and about 50% by 2020. So this is a group we really have to continue to focus on. and prepare for. And I'm sure many of our listeners would have experienced a difference with those younger ones coming into the organization. Their needs are different. They're quite upfront in stating their needs. And what we're seeing is that they definitely have a greater expectation to work in an environment where they are constantly engaged, where they're stimulated by exposure, they're looking for new and interesting things to do, and they definitely want to grow, and they're open to receive. In fact, they're looking forward to receive feedback to enable them to grow professionally. They also expect to be self-directed, and they want things that are personalized as well, and they want to seek support. And when they seek support, they expect the support to be given to them on demand, so to speak. Of course, while they will push themselves hard, they do expect their achievements to be recognized and valued. And as we mentioned before, they seek this continuous, they don't look at feedback as a negative thing, they see it as a way to unlock the potential. And so they constantly are seeking that as well. So when preparing for this group of people, these are some things we want to keep in mind in terms of their expectations.
So coming back, we were talking about that how this whole performance system is speeding up, and the changes are really speeding up in organizations that are implementing these changes. I think there are a couple of other points as well, Varsha, and I'll just add those. The structure in which people work. Of course, more and more people today are working in teams, and success and say performance will come when these people work together effectively. Now, quite often their managers are, in a remote place, so they're not directly supervising them. So if this structure has changed, then the way performance has to be managed in the structure also will need to be changed. And again, this is also driving the speed to change the processes and the performance management system. There's yet another area that is becoming very popular, and a lot of people are talking about it, and that's moving from employee engagement to employee experience. Of course, we all know that today people cannot be managed simply as numbers, and that change happened some time back. And however, today the most critical performing assets for any organization is its people, and the way this asset needs to be utilized or capitalized, I would rather use that word, is when they're inspired, motivated, and charged. So a performance management system that was okay for a particular time, let's say some years back, and it was very evaluative, cannot work in an era that has completely changed. And so, if with all these changes happening within the workplace, the speed at which organizations are wanting to relook at this process obviously also has gone up. It's a very good thing, I would think, because it gives one signal to everybody that the organizations are interested in their employees, in their people, and which is why they're looking at the whole performance management system in a different way and in a better way, looking at improving this. So yes, the speed is an important part of it, but what is also good is that it is sending a good signal across organizations. And just to talk about some figures over here to bring about the fact that this is becoming critical in the minds of people, simply the statistics speak for themselves. So here it talks about the fact that up to 96% of the HR leaders, they're dissatisfied with the current performance management process. So if there's such a large number that is dissatisfied, surely there'll be much more done in this going forward. So the speed that we see is only going to speed up. And similarly, if we look at what organizations are doing or have been doing, what this statistics tells us is that 83% of organizations are considering or have already made some changes to their performance management processes. So, so just to summarize, Varsha, yes, I think Berson's prediction was bang on.
Thank you, Neeta, and great for sharing your inputs. So we understand that there is a change or a transformation that is taking place, but what is this change? Can we concretely define the change?
Right. So, you see it in several elements and you see it in different ways. And I'll just talk about some of the experiences that we are having as we're going into the market. Of course, if we talk about multinationals, most of this change is being driven from their head offices and at the country level, looking at certain country specific issues, these are being moderated. But if we look at Indian organizations, it's very interesting because they realize that they need to make a lot of change with respect to the performance management system and process. But quite a few of them are still not very clear what to do and how to go about doing it. So what we find in our interactions with our clients is that there is a very back and forth iterative process of saying what do we need to do and what is it that we can do and how is it that we can look at. Definitely what comes across as a common theme is not just developing skills or giving feedback or coaching of helping the managers to be able to have performance conversations alone, but how do we create an ecosystem where really the focus shifts from, let's say, HR to the managers, and managers feel that it is one of the most important roles that they play in terms of having good conversations with their people and thereby enhancing performance. So a big change there in terms of the ask from organizations to look at things in a more holistic way and not to just give a solution which addresses skills. Another thing that we are seeing is that the measures of success of an initiative like this. So earlier, for a performance management system implementation, the measures of success would be timelines. So has everybody given their goal sheets on time or balance scorecards on time? Have the performance conversations happen, say, within a particular time? Have people sort of logged in and documented whatever it is that they needed to? But today, the measures of success are very different. And organizations that are a little bit involved into this process are looking at things like, how much of the strength of the high potential talent pipeline that they've been able to generate. So has the talent really gone up? Do we have better skills? That's another measure. More skills and better skills today than we had, let's say, a year later. And some people are even looking at talent agility because with everything becoming so agile and changeable, do we have people who we can move very quickly across? The time to be productive, is that coming down? So a lot of measures which are very different from the way we used to measure success of performance management, let's say in the yesteryears. And today what we see is there is a huge contrast. I think the third change that I'd like to focus upon, of course, everybody thinks that the change that is happening within this whole system and process is the doing away of the rating system or the bell curve. And while that has been very important and very critical, it possibly started with that. A lot of organizations have done away with the ratings. But what CEB research really points out is that just removing the ratings from your process is not going to give you results. In fact, what it does is that initially, of course, it gives you a little bit of a positive, image, a positive feeling within the organization. But very quickly, if you're not working on some of the important things that are required through this change and treating this entire, process as a change management process, productivity and the very purpose of performance, sort of is defeated. It doesn't give you the results that you're looking for. So yes, the ratings have been removed, but the changing focus on having good quality, continuous performance conversations is very important to support this change. In fact, later on, Craig will be taking a case example of this. So I won't go into details too much, except to say that the same research pointed out that when there is ongoing feedback, there is a 12% increase in performance. When there is forward-looking conversations, there's a 13% increase. And when you also include feedback from other sources, for example, peers, you see a 14% improvement on performance. So this is a very important shift which organizations really are focusing on. And maybe I'd like to just take an example of some of this shift by also, quoting an IBM study. So this was a study that was done by the IBM Institute, Smarter Workforce Institute, where it looked at an organization that had, changed the way that they were looking at performance management. We just go into what these changes were and how this really created the impact that it did. So here they looked at three changes essentially. The first is that they stopped rating against peers. So that's the traditional way, right? You look at a rating. When you give a rating, you look at a relative rating. How have the other people within the same peer group performed? And then you adjust it. So the new performance evaluation system said, no, that's not how we are going to evaluate. What we are going to look at is an absolute approach. So we look at this person's performance and only rate vis-a-vis that. The second change was that usually the assessments or the evaluation is done on the work performance, whereas the change that this company initiated was that we will look at the performance, but we will also look at the strengths. What are the expertise that the person brings into the system? And how is the person going to use this expertise going forward? So what is the potential that this person has for this expertise? And that's also something that we're going to look upon. And the third change was that usually you look at a scale. It could you most often it's a 5-point scale where it is very clearly defined what does 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 look like, and when can you give a rating of what. Quite watertight in its approach. Whereas the new performance evaluation that this company looked at was that it's going to be a little bit more flexible, simplified, and the managers can decide what is the rating that they ideally would like to give. It's just with these three changes that this organization achieved quite a lot of results. In fact, what they found was that it is not just that people perceived this as very good. So people really appreciated the fact that there was no relative assessment. That was really appreciated, and also that when we're looking at performance, we're also having conversations about the strengths and what is it that I can do to use these strengths moving ahead. But also the fact that the perception of how accurate this performance was really went up. So when the perception becomes better, there is no defending of the rating because people agree with it, people believe it's accurate, people then want to really develop and work on it, and it has a direct impact on performance. So it was a very interesting and an insightful study that IBM had conducted. And I think it gave us a lot of insights into how, when we're looking at performance management systems and processes, of course, especially the evaluation part, one is how fair is it, but equally important is what is the perception of people about the fairness of this whole process. So in fact, that's what I would like to just summarize, that a lot of changes on the ground, some companies looking at a few things to start with, some companies doing away with rating, most companies focusing on the discussion part of it, which I think Craig will take up shortly, and really looking at this whole issue as a system and not just as a band-aid approach where you fix one part. So that's the answer to your question, Varsha.
Thank you, Neeta. A lot of companies have actually embarked on this transition and transformational process. So, is there any impact that you can share with us for the transformation?
Right. So there is a lot of research coming up, about what is it that we are really seeing as helpful on ground. And like I mentioned earlier, if the system is not implemented right, sometimes it gives you reverse results as well. But three areas in which we are seeing, and this is again research by Neuro Leadership Institute, this institute surveyed 27 organizations, and what they found was significant improvement in quality of conversations, this having a direct impact on performance, a significant increase in the frequency of conversation. So people are now looking forward to it. And you can imagine the next point is directly related to that. There has to be an increase in employee engagement. And surely this will also lead to a better experience. So yes, we are seeing very good results that research is throwing up. Different organizations are constantly looking at it. And it's very, very encouraging.
That's very good to hear. So let's move on and take a case example. Craig, would it be all right if you start off with the first one?
Thank you, Varsha. So the example I'm going to talk about is a large banking client, and with many large corporates, they also had a good system backed by technology that facilitated this whole process of performance management. But what they found is that for most managers, it was a tick in the box. It was a last minute thing where they ended up doing it because they were under pressure of time, and it wasn't being done for the purposes that it was originally intended, and hence performance was not really changing. In fact, in some instances it would some of these conversations resulted in either the employee leaving, in some instances performance dipping because the employee is unhappy. So those are some things we wanted to avoid. So we said the challenge is to create a practical guide that is easy to use and is not about performance management as an event, but is about performance management as a way of life. So it had to be something that happens through the year. It also had to address the different types of employees that we are now handling. And more, there's a lot of millennials in the employee mix, and their needs are a little different as we considered earlier, as Neeta also spoke about, and so they needed to be addressed as well successfully. And so we put together this set, you could say, of process steps. In fact, I'll talk through the process steps as a foundation that would allow us to talk about the skills with the process as the backdrop. So the first part, of course, is always setting objectives, the goals, right? For the year, for the quarter, for the week, for the month, etc. But setting goals. Now, normally the way the goals are set is the focus is on the what, the KPI, the quantitative, right? But in addition to that, and again, normally the method used quite often is a structure called SMART, right? Specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. A good, simple structure to use. Now, in addition to that, though, what we want to do to make it more effective is to also include qualitative objectives, so qualitative goals. What are the behaviors? What is the values, etc. And align it with the behaviors, the values, the competency that the company has for employees at that level. But essentially we're saying, let's also create, it's also good to have a goal around the how, and not just what is achieved, but also how it is achieved, right? So for instance, a very good performer can achieve a certain objective, but he can be very aggressive while achieving it. So the how, let's say, is in conflict with the value of the organization. Then we bring that out and help align, this is what we want, but this is also how we'd like you to go about achieving it. So that's step one. Step two is then to have a robust system that is fair to the manager and the employee on collecting in evidence that can be then used to provide feedback. So what is a good way to collect evidence where it still builds trust, the employee feels fair and walks away from a conversation not feeling unhappy? So to do that, we need to have a structure that allows us to collect information that is evidence-based. And we will quickly talk you through a simple system where first of all, we'll look to collect information from the employee himself. What's working, what worked, what is not working so well, or if you're talking about the past, what worked very well, what didn't. Two is to, and this is again the employee's own point of view, right? So straight away you look at a balance because you're saying what's good, what's not so good. The same thing, what's good, what not so good, but now we look at it from the point of view of stakeholders. So we collect information from stakeholders that the employee deals with. What did they feel went very well? What's evidence for that? What did they feel didn't go very well, and what is the evidence for that? Now what you're looking for is a theme. You're not looking for specific one-off comments, but you're looking for a theme that comes up, and then that theme again on what went well and what didn't go well is what then you will pass on to the team member, and it's validated information, you could say. In addition to that, collecting from stakeholders, you'd also want to provide, the manager would want to provide his own point of view, and this again has to be observable, evidence-based. What did he see, observe, hear the team member do, right? So if that is captured and then that can be then part of the conversation. Many times it will corroborate what the stakeholders are saying as well. And again, there has to be an element of what the manager saw that was really good, and what the manager saw or heard that he'd like the team member to improve on. In addition to those two areas, we now come to what we spoke about in setting performance expectations, and this is on the objectives. And again, it's good to evaluate on both. Number one, on the actual number, the KRA, the KPI, but number two, also on the behaviors, the input behavior that we said, if we keep doing this, we'll reach the goal, we'll reach the output numbers that we are looking for. So those are 5 areas that we just covered under observing performance: employee's own point of view, stakeholder point of view, manager point of view, what the KRAs say, and what the behavior says. So we put all of that together, and that gives us a very strong but fair baseline to have conversations with the team member. From there, we move to step 3 of the process, which is giving feedback. And a way to do this, a very good way to give feedback. Of course, we said earlier it needs to be continuous. If we look at the context of employees today, they used to, and especially the younger, the newer group coming in, they're used to regular feedback. They're quite open to it. They're used to it from LinkedIn. They post a picture on LinkedIn, they get feedback immediately. 100 likes, very happy. 2 likes, not so happy. But then it doesn't disturb them as much. It seems to motivate them to further action. So in that line, feedback needs to be continuous, ongoing. It doesn't have to all be formal. If it's continuous, then it can even be informal, over a coffee, for instance, sometimes in a room. But it has to be, as you mentioned before, a way of life. And a simple, easy method to use is SBI-BI. Now, you might have come across SBI before. It's situation, behavior, impact. What's the situation? It's the context. So let's say a salesperson, the context is yesterday when you were speaking with a colleague. What's the behavior? I heard you speak quite aggressively with the other person. You didn't listen at all. You were just pushing your opinion and not allowing the other team member to speak at all. And the impact of that is the other team member may not want to work with you, may not feel comfortable working with you, collaboration will be affected. So that's situation, behavior, impact. Now, the interesting thing about adding a BI at the end of SBI, and again, you're going to say behavior, impact, is the second behavior is the behavior that you want them to now start doing more of, right? So the first behavior is the one you want them to stop doing. The SB is the behavior you want to stop, I, and then the second B is the behavior you want them to start doing more of, and then the impact of them doing that behavior in the future. So a simple framework, but allows us to give continuous feedback in a way that's non-threatening and very future focused. Again, something that Neeta mentioned earlier can boost effectiveness. What we also felt is very critical is to add in this whole process is to add coaching. Now, what coaching does is it allows us, and of course there's various models of coaching, but the basis of coaching is to listen. To ask questions and to listen. And what this helps us to do, so feedback, no matter how you look at it, no matter how you do it, is ultimately emanating from the manager and will to some extent impact the relationship, because it's not easy to receive feedback, right, from the team member point of view. So what coaching does is it's a key element to add in the mix of the whole performance management conversation or process, because it enables us to help the team member feel listened to. And this is critical because if he feels listened to, that will build trust in the manager and will hence again go a long way in making those conversations effective. What it will also do is it will give you input into what the team member really desires and cherishes, and you can use that, you can tie it in when you're giving feedback to help tie it in with the team member's own goals and objectives of what he wants out of his job. And now that we've done all of this in a very balanced, structured way, now we're ready to assess performance. So assessing performance is a culmination of all of these steps we mentioned, and it's not something that's standalone, that just happens. So in this example, augmenting the process with these skills helped. There was a lot of excitement and energy when people saw that these processes really are beneficial, and it continues to be applied. What would further help is to have a way to then report, of course, review, then report and reward the managers to ensure that behavior becomes consistent.
Thank you, Trey. So let's move on now to another case where we leverage technology to bring competencies to life through our IBM product called Talent Framework. Before I ask Mr. Nick Kouma from our IBM team to take us through this case, Neeta, would you like to share a small brief on the Talent Framework?
Right. Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Varsha. So the talent frameworks. Now, this is one of the most, I would say, a stellar product from the IBM team. And really what it does is addresses the issue of defining what good looks like in any job. So essentially what we have over here is for any job, for any role, an understanding of what that role really requires, what are the main responsibilities of that role, and linked to that, what are all the competencies that are required in order to perform those responsibilities at the proficiency levels at which these competencies are needed. And the competencies are not just behavioral competencies here, but you also have functional competencies, you also have technical competencies clearly defined for every role. Now, how this really helps is that you would agree with me that one of the challenges in performance management is that we are not able to clearly define that for a role, what do we really expect the person to be able to do in terms of the technical stuff, in terms of the behavioral competencies that the person needs to demonstrate, etc. And when we are not able to define that performance very clearly, it has an impact on the perception of what the person thinks and what really the supervisor may be expecting. So Talent Framework is a very exhaustive library defining all kinds of competencies required for a particular role at the proficiency levels that it is required, and clearly linking it to the processes of HR. So, for example, if I'm looking at coaching a person, and I know that the person is not very strong in a particular competency, what kind of tips do I need in order to build this particular competency is given through this framework. So it's like a ready-made library of competencies required for any role in any organization. So here we really have it for 21 industries and 184 job families. And all that an organization then needs to do is take this library, customize it to what they may require from it, and it's ready to be used. So that's how this talent framework is being used by organizations across the globe, and really leading to phenomenal results. In fact, what we found is that there's been a 189% improvement on learning when organizations have used the talent frameworks. So that's the overview, but really let's get to Nick to help us understand the next case study, which is about a financial services organization and how the talent framework was used for performance management.
We worked with an organization, and you'll see that on the next slide. We worked with an organization that employed 60,000 people, and it was it was absolutely useful when it comes to driving performance management initiatives. The company came to us and they said, we've actually grown quite significantly. we've reached the point of 60,000 people, 60,000 people. And we now have 7,000 roles defined across our organization, to the point where it's extremely difficult for us to plan when it comes to performance management, when it comes to succession planning. Our points of comparability are a bit weak, or they're spread out, it's disparate. We have a challenge when it comes to uniformly assessing our organization. And so by deploying talent frameworks, we were able to help them map those 7,000 roles into 300 roles. Now, this created some great points of consistency for the company in terms of growth, but more importantly for them in terms of managing their organization, in terms of having larger talent pools to understand where high performance actually is within roles versus where it's not, determining which skills are transferable to ensure for a fluid workforce. Again, this organization has grown quite significantly, and so trading of talent was a rather rampant behavior. It was part of their culture. Having people shift from one team to the next was a part of their DNA. And so it allowed for them to have this clearly mapped out where people actually fit within the company and whether or not they were suitable for another role, whether it was something that management requested or whether or not it was the individual pathing out their own career on their own. One of the secondary outcomes, which we were interested in and we were delighted to see, was that in pockets of the organization, there was actually a significant increase in employee engagement. And this is, and we happen to be doing their employee engagement survey for them as well. This was a result of the fact that one of their key drivers of engagement was around having clear expectations set by the company from the company to the individual in terms of what they would need to do to be successful in their role. Additionally, having a clear path for their own growth and development was another driver of employee engagement. Those areas of the organization that had the strongest adoption and awareness around talent frameworks, its usefulness, and the broad application, had significant increases in employee engagement levels. Now, many of you know employee engagement is very strongly correlated to business outcomes, and so this company was quite pleased to see this as a result. And so, directly they had launched this program to support when it comes to performance management, but then indirectly it also was driving business outcomes via improvements on employee engagement levels. And so that's a second example around a large-scale global financial services company and how it was used to drive employee engagement and to clean up their performance management processes.
Nick, thank you so much. I can't help thinking enough that when there is clarity around jobs, there's clarity around roles, there are clear measures, of success clearly identified, it gives so much control to everyone, whether it is the employee, whether it is the manager, whether it is the HR. So it's really, really important and critical from that standpoint. So Varsha, if it's okay with you, I'll take the third case study as well. This case study is about a FMCG company, a multinational, one of the companies that have been in existence for a long time. So actually it had all its performance management processes in place. The systems were very well advanced and controlled by the head office. So they were really evolved systems that the organization was using. The organization had spent several levels of training. So they've given several training programs to their managers and leaders around how to hold these performance conversations. They were very focused on coaching. So a lot of skill development had happened with these managers. However, what they found globally, in fact, was that despite having everything in place, really the performance conversations were not happening as they needed to, and the system was only being followed in letter, not in spirit. So it wasn't really delivering the results of performance. the overall environment within that organization was very positive towards people, very people-oriented organization, but really performing at a sub-optimum level. And really the performance could have gone up several notches if this whole process was really working well. So globally, the organization decided that it needed to relook at this whole issue, and they defined it a little bit as a culture issue and also as an issue which was a mindset issue. So people wanted to be nice to each other. People didn't want to hold, their subordinates to certain tasks that needed to be done. So they were happier being a good, happy family, performing suboptimally than really stretching the performance. But this was, of course, not acceptable in the new situation that they were in. So, looking at this, what they went about doing was they re-looked at the system because the system also needed some improvements, and they realized, for example, that while they had the system in place, they hadn't mandated, they were still only mandating the typical 2 conversations in a year philosophy. So, one conversation where they were looking at the entire year's performance, and the second conversation, which was around development. They needed to bring these two together. So the system was improved. The expectations from the managers with respect to the system was called out very clearly. And then the part where they really engaged with us was to say that, we have the system in place, but we need to redesign the way learning is happening around these skills. Because clearly what is happening is that, despite spending in so much of time and money and effort, people are still not really taking to these conversations. So can we redesign the way the skilling is happening? And can we create an implementation plan of how this is going to be cascaded using the skills and the processes together across the organization? So we need to bring that culture change by ensuring that, everybody's talking the same language. And for that, they had also identified that they will have internal change agents, if you like, picked out, and they then will look at, how they cascade it across the organization. Whereas our role was essentially to design the solution, to train these change agents, and most importantly, to create the kind of collaterals that they could use, which could easily help them to perform this role. So how can we make it engaging? How can we make it, fun, positive, and mostly how can we really simplify it so that people actually do it? So it was a very interesting project where we really went back to saying that from a very evolved system, how do we really make it very simple so that it's workable? And so the learning over here was that, to make these people perform the role that was expected out of them, we had to really declutter this whole process and this whole conversation piece. And we really made it, our main objective to the leaders was that, if it's very easy to do, if it's something that you can do without having to really, put a lot of thought into it, then possibly you will do it. So hence the collaterals really helped, and we created easy collateral. So for example, we looked at what are the different check-in conversations you can have. And let's say if you're motivating a person, and that's one objective of one of the check-in conversations, what are the things that you can say? What are the questions that you can ask? And made it very specific to, let's say, 4 or 5 different types of conversations that you can have, so that their repertoire really increased and enhanced, and made it very simple for them to apply. The other interesting thing for us over here was that since the technology was in place and the system was very well in place, almost everything was available, but somehow the leaders weren't using it. And what we needed to do was literally to take, the horse to the pond. I mean, it was literally to say it all exists. So really, if it's already there, then how can you very easily use it to achieve your objectives? And they themselves were so surprised. So it's strange sometimes in organization, everything exists, but people still don't connect the dots, don't use what rich data they have, what rich processes they have. And sometimes when you bring it together in an easy way and help them to do it, there is a real aha moment, because then people really feel that they can use this well and it's really going to help them, and it's easy and simple to do. So that's what we really did in this situation. We we brought those processes to life. We brought those collaterals to life. We made it very, very simple for the managers to hold these conversations. We actually gave them, like quick reference cards around the different types of conversations and how they can really hold these conversations effectively. And then when they just practiced all of that, it was not very difficult. It seemed like an easy thing to do. So that's what we did, and that was how we really designed it. And then, of course, these change agents were trained to conduct these workshops, use these collaterals, take it across their different businesses. And the results that we have seen right now, because this is year 2, is that already we are finding that the quality of these conversations are increasing, are becoming much better. Sorry, the quality is improving and the quantity is increasing. So we said that how many check-in conversations should you ideally have, and most people said about 3, but we are finding that it's averaging to about 4. So people are definitely having at least 4 conversations which they are recording, and they are taking these conversations formally. So that's been a good movement for us to see. The other thing is like what I mentioned, that the technology, the processes, the systems, the collaterals that are already there in place are being used. And this for us was a big win, because when people start using it, I think it's a two-way process. When they use it, they find it easy, and when they find it easy, they also use it. And we were able to break that barrier of saying that it's easy to use, and it's also very helpful to use, and therefore use it more. And I think that's what we were able to do. So that was another success. We are beginning to see some impact on engagement scores. We can't say that there is a significant impact as of now, because this is only year 2, and it's not that it has been cascaded across. It has possibly been cascaded to 60% of the organization or so. But we've sort of now this is being handled by the company itself. So that's how we probably may not know the current status, but it's suffice to say that it has been making some impact, and that's something that we are being able to observe. And the organization is happy to have made some sort of breakthrough through this process. So I just want to summarize. I think we've taken 3 case studies, where the first case study was more about how do you bring the foundational skills to life? How do we make sure that those are happening? The second was about how we use technology, and how can we really make sure that for every job, once we have the desired state clearly defined, how we can use that to have effective conversations. And the third, we've really looked at how an organization addressed this issue from a culture perspective, and took a view of having everything in place, but making sure that there is real behavior change at every level within the organization to enhance performance. So these were the 3 case studies, and while we will be taking questions later on, I'll also just move on to what we have learned from our clients itself, and also something that we would like to recommend to all of you. So 3 recommendations, not very complicated. The first one that we've seen organizations do, which we think are creating good results, is that to look at this issue as a change management holistic issue. So not look at it and not try and fix it just in one small area, because it won't get fixed. This is complicated, complex, and it requires a lot of support to hold it together. So if you look at it from a change initiative lens, and look at all the areas that you need to fix, and you may not fix all of them right away, but at least you have a plan around it, and then you start. It's more likely to succeed than if you were to only just look at fixing it, in one area. The second recommendation, which also a lot of our colleagues are also corroborating across the world, is if you cannot start with the whole process, definitely keep the skilling effort constant and sustained in your system. Handling performance conversations is not so easy and is not so simple. And it requires a behavior change. It requires a mindset change. But one way of ensuring that this happens is to constantly have these skilling sessions, year after year, because somewhere people then move up. And I think that, again, like we said in the earlier part of this webinar, it's important, it's not only important to have these conversations, but it's also important to ensure that these are forward moving. They are based on also strengths and not just looking at evaluation, but really plugging the gap between performance and what needs to be done to develop oneself in order to be able to perform better and better. So this is a second recommendation: keep sustained efforts around skill building going. And lastly, technology can really help in providing that ecosystem, in providing support, in providing data, in providing multi-level feedback. And it's going to be, it really helps, because I think that, when people get that technology support, the confidence really becomes much more to implement it. So if we can look at these three things, and you can begin anywhere. Again, I want to reiterate, it's not as if every organization is only looking at doing away with ratings as the way to look at performance management systems and processes. You can start anywhere. You can, look at whichever area you really want to improve first. But again, look at it holistically. So that's the key message.
Thank you, Neeta, and thank you, Craig and Nick, for sharing your experiences with us today, as well as sharing some recommendations with all of us. While you've been talking, we've been getting a lot of questions. So let's just take a few based on how much time we have. If you're not able to answer all the questions, we will be sending responses to everyone over email. So the first question that we have is, how do we get the business to sign up for a change in performance management? So I think what the question here is, how do we enlist support from the business for performance management change? Neeta, would you like to take this?
Yeah, so I'll refer to the last case study that we talked about, which was really, when did business come on board? And of course, they had the same issue or challenge that almost all organizations have, is to try and transfer the responsibility of managing performance of the subordinates to the leader, and not HR, taking it on. And that's why they said this seems to be a mindset issue, it seems to be a culture issue, but really most organizations face this challenge. Business, in our experience, in most situations or in most organizations, business does realize that the performance management system is a very important process. So it's not so much about realizing that it is important, but I think where the challenge is that, usually business feels that it is too complicated, it's too complex, and it takes too much time. And if I have to look at all of this, then the short-term results get compromised. So how I can't focus on this and on that. I think the key is to make this whole process very, very simple, and to make it really easy to apply in a day-to-day way, and to give them enough support through technology. So I think that the change really happened in the last organization that we were talking about, when the leaders realized that it was very simple to do. When the leaders realized that they had the data to have these conversations. And when the leaders realized that they knew the skills, but the application of skills in the process was a barrier that they could overcome. So you handhold them till such time as they start saying, it's very easy to do, and then you can really take a nap. So I think the key here is make it simple, link it, of course, to the process, give them collaterals that they can use and refer to in having these conversations, especially in the whole performance management cycle, and simplify technology so that they can use it easily and it also supports them. And once they see that it is easy to do, possibly they will do it. So I think that it's that part. It's not explaining to them how important it is. All of them know that it is very important. It's also not telling them that without this you're not playing your role. Somewhere they also know that. At least in most organizations, people do know that. It's just that helping them to understand that focusing on business is not different from managing performance. It's the same thing. So that linkage, when that happens, then they take it on.
Thank you, Neeta. I think we have time for one more question. This is, should the improvement in performance management start by removing the rating process?
Right. I can understand where this question is coming from, I think there are 2-3 areas in a performance management process which people find painful, and one of which is addressing this whole issue of rating. It's actually funny because all that people do in this process is use it for evaluation and then land up saying evaluation is the most difficult part of it. So, 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 so the focus on evaluation and the focus on ratings has really prompted a lot of organizations to relook at the performance management system because they realize that the whole purpose is getting defeated. But having said that, my answer to this is no. A lot of organizations today are not ready to remove the rating. And I think that's okay. From our data and from our statistics, what we found world over is that 50% of the organizations have done away with rating, but 50% are still holding on to it. Because also, like we talked earlier in the webinar, that just removing that one pain point and not supplementing it with all the processes that are needed to ensure that this process works well can be even more detrimental. So you can remove the ratings if your process is strong enough, robust enough, watertight enough. You can remove it and then you can experiment and make sure that the rest of the process is the process is working, the new process is working very well. But you can also let the ratings be for the moment. And even if you're wanting to do that, I think our view would be focus on the quality of conversations. Start looking at new measures of success, not just that conversations have happened, but what is the quality? And I think starting from that enablement, if you do that, and even if you don't remove the ratings, I think it's fine.
Thank you, Neeta. So I think we do not have time to take on the rest of the questions. We will be responding to all of them over email. And thank you so much for joining us today as we went through performance management in a changing landscape. Thank you.